Hey everybody, Dave Meshkov from Knopman Marks here, and what I've got for you today is our instructor-led Q&A on equities. I want you to download the slides with the questions and answer them with me as I walk you through the material. Let's get started. Let's dive into our first Q&A review session. Now, as we're doing these, my recommendation is that you actually read each of the questions and select what you think is the best answer before I go through them with you. That way, you'll know if you got it right, and you'll know also if you got it right for the right reason. I'd invite you to make a small note to yourself as to why you think each answer is right, and if you're close on another choice, if you're like 50-50, I also suggest you highlight what you think your second best choice would have been, but why you steered away from it. What caused you to not actually select that one? In doing so, you'll get more value from each of these questions that we're doing together, and hopefully gain additional insight and clarity on the equity section here and each of the sessions that we do using this setup. So review question 1.1. We have an investor planning to build a portfolio of equity securities. This investor would not include which of the following products? Would our investor include preferred, debentures, warrants, or common? Now, hopefully, even if you didn't know what a debenture is, because that is the right answer, you would be able to have selected it because you say, I know what preferred is, I know what warrants are, and I know that common stock are all equities. This is also an opportunity where if you don't know what a debenture is, and you were drilling and practicing on your own, not here in the video lectures, but in the QBank and the practice exams, you'd say, I got to go learn what a debenture is. And while you drill and practice, you would have the answer rationale showing up, hopefully clarifying and providing the insight that you needed. Question 1.2. An investor might include an ADR in their portfolio if they're seeking what? Short-term growth, steady dividend income, exposure to international markets, and investing opportunities in the distressed debt arena. What is the characteristic most closely aligned with ADRs? International, foreign equity exposure. And this highlights one of the other strategies I'll invite students to use when they're trying to get better and drill and practice. And one technique is, after you read the question stem, that's the first part, but before you've analyzed any of the answer choices, take a moment to project, what is it that I'm looking for? What do I think that if I found that, I'd be very happy and suspect, not be sure, but suspect it's the right answer? By doing that projection, it sets you up to avoid getting distracted by the second best answer choice. Because when we create these tests and when FINRA creates its tests, often it's the case that they'll be the best answer, and the second best one will throw out there with some aspect that looks good. And that's what you need to avoid. So doing this projection model is a pretty good way to help keep yourself true to the insight and the information that you know. So maybe you would have read this and said an investor might include an ADR in their portfolio if they're seeking. You'd say, well, ADR, you say, all right, first and foremost, international. You say second, equity exposure, that level of risk return would be two things that come to my mind. And then there you go, choice C, international, bingo, you got it. Next question. The stock market has risen steadily over the past few months, while the value of XYZ common stock has declined during the same period. Investors who have held XYZ during this time period have experienced what risk? Again, were you able to identify it? The market is up, your particular stock is down. That's business risk. What are the other terms for business risk? Non-systematic risk or specific risk. You might also add value to each question you take by using this strategy. You'd say, well, here they've identified business risk as one of the things that I need to be able to identify and define. Another question might ask me, how do you mitigate business risk? And so you'd say, business risk, if I wanted to avoid that, I could have held a diversified portfolio. Use this strategy to get more value from each question. Not just be able to pick the right answer, but take it one or two more steps. What's another strategy you can use? Run through each of the different risks here and make sure you can define that. So here, by choosing answer choice B, you've identified you know what business risk is. But what is credit risk? Could you speak to the fact that credit risk is a risk that the issuer defaults and is unable to make payments? How about inflation risk? The risk that your investment will be negatively impacted by inflation. Or systematic risk, and this one you should know for sure because we covered it in this lesson, right, is that your investment will do poorly because the overall market does poorly. Be able to define all the answer choices for yourself. You might even do a double work and say, I've now defined systematic risk. How could I mitigate or avoid that? You say, well, that's hard to diversify away. You can't diversify systematic risk, but I could buy a hedge. I could hedge to avoid some of that risk. Notice what I'm doing is trying to get more value from each question, testing myself, quizzing myself on not just what's the right answer, but what's the right answer and why. And what are all the other answer choices? And what do I know about those other answer choices? And the more that you do that, the better off you will be. The next question asks us about an equity investment that carries less risk than common stock, but has a smaller upside potential as compared to common stock. Would be what? A warrant, a call option, a zero coupon bond, or a preferred stock. Equity instrument with less risk than common and smaller upside? Well, that's preferred. And we did that nice graph in the advanced material where we literally charted one out, seeing that. The highs were not quite as high, the lows, however, were not as low, and all the while, we were pulling out cash in the form of those dividends. Question 1.5. An investor plans to buy shares of XYZ common stock because it pays a regular dividend. To ensure that she receives the dividend, when must she purchase these shares? On or before the day the dividend's declared? Before the X date? On the X date or later? On or before the record date? Going back to that dividend process, dividend procedure, very important stuff. When do we have to buy the stock? Before the X date. Before the X date. If you buy on the X date, it is too late. If you do not know all of the defined dates with the dividend process, the declaration date, the X date, the record date, and the fourth one, not stated here, the payable date, those would all be valuable terms to bubble up in your mind when you do this question and know what each of them mean. As we go through these review questions, remember, the goal is not just to be able to pick the right answer, it's to be able to pick the right answer and know why it's right. And what are the other answer choices? How are they related to this topic? And if there were questions on those, could I get them right too? Putting in the hard work question by question, taking more time on each question but getting more value is a better study approach here than trying to get through the volume, as many questions as possible, to just get a volume of question count up there. So I hope that you found this first lesson useful, and we're going to zoom in to the next bond section in lesson 2. Did you find that Q&A useful? Did I clarify some of the more difficult concepts, draw distinctions and nuances in ways that maybe you didn't pick up on your own? Well, in our SIE training program, I do that for every single lesson that we've got. Head on over to the training center and experience the Knopman Marks program as you prepare for your SIE.